normal people become terrified of criminals.
Shots were just fired. Police just came out and told us, and we're headed there right now.
They become terrified of their own government.
From the SF Chronicle, David DePape describes far-right conspiracies that led him to Pelosi House. That's right. This is the guy who attacked Paul Pelosi, and he testified the other day. These stories went wild. He was claiming that he wanted to get Nancy Pelosi to confess on camera while he wore a unicorn costume, and then he wanted Biden to pardon her for these crimes, which is all around. The dude's clearly unwell. But who do you think they're blaming for all of this? In all of these new comment sections and on leftist Twitter and all these chats.
That sounds like something Ian would say. The unicorn costume, and then get the president to
I want to say that this is a guy who wanted Joe Biden to pardon Nancy Pelosi. Let me read the story. They say David DePape, the man accused of attacking Paul Pelosi with a hammer in San Francisco last year, testified in his federal trial Tuesday, offering the most detailed glimpse to date into the motivations and conspiracies that drove him to embark on what he said he and his lawyers described as a mission to fix a world corrupted by Democrats. Under questioning from his own attorney, DePape sketched the contours of his worldview and his political leanings, both of which were heavily informed by conservative media personalities and podcasters. David DePape testified that he subscribed to a number of baseless and wildly discredited conspiracy theories, many of which revolved around assertions of cabals of high-ranking public officials and celebrities harming children. Yada yada, he says he used to be left-wing, and I wonder if the Chronicle actually removed the references, but...
to a search.
Yeah, I think they may have taken it out. Maybe they were scared that we were going to sue him. Did I make the cut? Okay, here we go. I'm sorry. Here it is. We're here. He turned instead to conservative commentators Tim Pool and James Lindsay, DePape said. He also went on to mention many others. He mentioned Glenn Beck and other channels, but I just want to shout out, depending on which news outlet you read, they'll choose selectively which person he claimed to have been listening to. And Tim Pool and James Lindsay. And I am offended by this because, as Phil pointed out, the demanding Joe Biden pardon the Democrats.
Yeah, that's all Ian.
That's all Ian. Ian, what are you doing? You get me in trouble over here.
As soon as I heard this, I was like, he didn't pay attention to anything Tim said. That's all Ian Crossland did.
Famous far-right commenter Ian Crossland.
The same thing happened to me, though. They gave one of my quotes to Ian. They get all of his quotes screwed up.
Yeah, who was it? Media Matters, who claimed that your quote was Ian?
I think it was Gawker, and I was talking about how horribly destructive no-fault divorce is, and they said Ian Crossland said it. It's like that's not. It was like clearly something I would say, and they're like Ian Crossland said.
But they don't watch the show enough, right? Yeah. They don't know who any of you guys are.
So this is a guy who committed a horrible attack, on Paul Pelosi. These things shouldn't happen. They need better security. And they're claiming, he was watching, my show or whatever. And I saw this story and I thought it was funny. Media Matters quoted me the last time when the guy in Texas posted 4 clips from IRL. And the quote is, Tim Pool says, "I think it's funny and I just don't care," or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, dude, look, there will not be a single person who can ever get me to care that some dude who did some bad thing watched my show. We get millions upon millions. That's insane. The idea that James, first of all, I want to shout out conservative commentator James Lindsay. Yeah, which is laughable. What's up, Jim? What's up, Jim? Yeah, and but one thing I really love about Ian Crossland, who's not here unfortunately tonight, the thing that's great about him is he's a weird guy. He doesn't fit in any political box. His opinions are wild. He's for the death penalty. He's like very much for it. We had this big conversation where he was like, "What do we got to get? Got to have the death penalty for these people." And I'm like, "Whoa!" But then he's like, "But we got to pardon all Hillary Clinton." And I'm just like, "He's kind of wild." But he helps break the machine, because when Gawker takes a quote from Seamus and applies it to Ian, or when Hassan Piker claims Ian is a conservative, it shows you that their arguments are meaningless, completely empty.
I don't think we should take this at face value. Julie, of course, has been following the January 6th trials, and Julie, that there are many cases where, at the coaching of attorneys, the guy who had one motive is coached into a different storyline that is made palatable for the media, palatable for the jury, palatable for the judge to show compassion. So what I see here is a leftist who has now realized that moving right and claiming to be under the right-wing spell will suddenly get him a lot of sympathetic attention.
Lower sentencing.
Lower sentencing. The conservatives drove him crazy.
Well, and this guy is an illegal immigrant from Canada who voted for the Green Party. I mean, I don't.
This is why they had to construct the narrative, and that's why they needed a migration, because they know he started left. So they had to account for that.
It probably still is.
And probably still is.
This proves it. It's just one big conspiracy against me. I'm the victim here.
You are the center of the universe, Tim Pool.
I'm the victim because I'm the
last paragraph there talking about Gail Rubin. At the very end, it says, talking about particularly on pedophilia and sexual relationships have been misconstrued. Nothing that Gail Rubin, that James Lindsay has said about Gail Rubin's writings, none of it has been misconstrued. It is all word for word stuff that she has written in her books.
And let me drive it home. I don't know about where this guy gets his ideas or anything like that. I will say it's certainly not a Tim Pool idea to pardon corrupt politicians. But they bring up Gail Rubin in this. Why? She has nothing to do with the Pelosi's. This man going to the Pelosi's house and wanting to attack or harm Pelosi has nothing to do with James Lindsay or Gail Rubin. It does seem like what you said, Dinesh, that, hey, look, I bet his defense attorneys said, here's what you're going to do. You're in San Francisco. This is the jury. You got to claim it's the right wing that radicalized you. Attack James Lindsay, Glenn Beck, Tim Pool, and there's a few others they mention. And then you'll get lesser charges. They'll use that to weave a narrative.
I mean, Julie, hasn't this exactly been the January 6th?
Yes.
Not in some cases, where the court-appointed attorneys have lured the defendants into this kind of whole therapeutic, I used to be a Trumpster. I've now realized that he deceived me.
Yep.
That's what Jenna Ellis said, right? If I had known when she said that she was going to plead guilty in Georgia, she said, if I had known what I know now, I would never have acted that way. I mean, it's like renounce everything you've ever done and throw yourself on the mercy of these completely biased juries.
It's a struggle
sir,
session.
We're having a conversation right now.
They do have struggle sessions still ongoing. And you had a public defender, Heather Shaner, who's represented several January 6th defendants. And she actually gives them a list of books and movies to read to forgive themselves for their white privilege. And then they will go to the judge and they'll write an apology letter, or they will tell the judge in a letter or verbally, I didn't realize how racist and anti-Semitic, and we killed all the Native Americans, and so these are the sort of
female
public defenders that represent.
In my
so it's the same thing.
My own campaign finance case. Think about this: I give money to Wendy Long, who's running, college friend of mine, and the judge. This is the part I want to focus on as part of my sentence: psychiatric counseling, as if my behavior is so inexplicable. It demands psychiatric therapy. But see, I think what they were getting at is, had I gone through the psychological counseling 8 months, and had I come out and sort of seen the light, and I realized I'm actually now a leftist, and I'm now applying for like a job on MSNBC, I would have been declared cured.
Wouldn't that be hilarious if you actually did that? Just to troll the system, if you're like, no, yeah, I'm a leftist, and got a job on MSNBC, and then their highest rated host was someone who was re-educated into being a leftist.
Here's a point that I want to make about this case that I think everyone needs to ask themselves. As Dinesh pointed out, and as mentioned, Julie Kelly, in your work, January 6ers are given this narrative. Why would a criminal defendant go on the stand for several hours and explain that the crime he committed was actually part of a much, much larger conspiracy, and that he actually was attempting several more crimes? For what purpose would this defendant be advantaged by admitting to further criminal conspiracy on the stand?
I mean, he's obviously theoretically going to help the state with something. There's no way that he's counseled to do that unless they potentially could throw someone else under the bus. My point is, there's
no legitimate legal circumstance where they're like, go up there and admit to doing more crimes. Admit to wanting to do more crimes. Unless the narrative was, how can we rope in right-wing conspiracy stuff? So you have a guy who attacked Paul Pelosi, and that's the story. He was a leftist. He was a Green Party guy. He was Canadian. They want to weave this into a story about the far right. But how do you? He attacked Paul Pelosi. Well, of course, the Pelosi's are there. So then he has to go on and say, well, Newsom and Gail Rubin were targets too. So you're admitting to wanting to do more crimes to create the narrative.
That's right.
Yeah, my guess is this guy is out of his mind, and they realized that they could now move him like a puppet in whatever direction they wanted to. And so they've constructed a narrative.
I think it might be simple enough that his defense came to him and said, look, you're in San Francisco. It is as blue can be.
Yep.
You attacked the leader of the Democratic Party's husband. You need to shift this politically. And this is a scary thing for what's happening in this country.
Well, keep in mind, too, excuse me, Tim, but the U.S. Capitol Police, the same organization that allowed the Capitol to be left unsecured on January 6th, they were monitoring the Pelosi's property in real time. So they've expanded their offices out of Washington, they shouldn't, to parts of Florida and California. So they were monitoring, and they said, oh, we just looked away and whatever. Then all of a sudden this guy bursts into the house, breaks into the house. So it's also part of, to your point, you're right, but also covering up, again, another agency that really should be disbanded. Congress shouldn't have their own police force. Not only are they protecting, not protecting in this case, but they're totally incompetent, should be disbanded, and they're once again trying to cover up what they did wrong.
We had a legal issue a year or so ago. So I call my lawyer and I say, hey, we've got this legal dispute, civil, not criminal, and a civil tort of some sort. And he said, okay, well, if we sue in California, we lose instantly. If we sue in New York, we lose instantly because these were big media corporations that we were looking at. And he goes, so obviously we're going to try and do it in West Virginia, which means we need to figure out why we have standing to be in West Virginia to do it. And I laughed and I was like, I totally get it. And he goes, look, man, you get a judge in New York and they're going to be corporate and they're going to be Democrats and they instantly hate you no matter what you say because you're Tim Pool. You go to West Virginia and they're probably going to instantly like you. I got to be honest, you file in West Virginia, the judge is going to side with you no matter what you say. And I'm like, that's crazy. But that's the reality of where we are with this political bifurcation.
Absolutely.
Outside of any grand conspiracy or narrative crafting or whatever we want to say may have happened, I think his defense lawyers just said, look, man, pretend that tell everyone that it's the evil boogeyman far right that made you do it and cross your fingers.
Well, you know, you mentioned earlier Jenna Ellis, and part of what's going on here is that the plea bargain system has become a legal bludgeon in which they come to you and in effect say, we can get something on you no matter what. And now what they do is because of the large federal accordion of statutes, they can re-describe the same thing you did and have multiple charges. In my campaign finance case, they were like, we'll get you on bank fraud because you took your money out of the bank. We'll get you on mail fraud because you put your check in the mail. And see, those things carry years in prison. And so then they go, okay, but if you sign here and plead to this, and so whether you're guilty or innocent makes no difference. If you make a rational calculation, you have to take the plea. But of course, politically, it's ruinous because then everybody jumps up and goes, see, he admitted it. So
let me give you an example. I was at a criminal trial a long time ago. This is another lifetime. And the federal prosecutors said of the defendant, who quite literally broke no law, but they were trying to put him in prison for decades. I was flabbergasted when I heard the prosecutor say it was sentencing hearing, why they wanted to justify very, very long prison sentence. And the prosecutor said, Your Honor, the defendant used a uniform resource locator through the hypertext transfer protocol to obtain private information of people he did not have the right to get information from. And I was like, oh my God. He just said the dude typed in a URL into a web browser, but he said it in such a way so that the jury and the judge would be like, wow, what is this crazy technical thing for which I am not understanding? If I said, Your Honor, the dude typed some words into the browser bar and pressed enter and they sent him information, he'd be like, well, I do that every day. Right. But they're trying to justify putting him in prison for a decade plus. So that's why they use that language.
I mean, after this police state film, people come up to me and they're like, well, Dinesh, I'm not Donald Trump and I didn't go in the Capitol on January 6th and I pay my taxes and, I'm okay. They're not going to come after me. And I say to these guys, I go, listen, why don't you tell me for 10 minutes about your life? What do you do? Tell me where you live. Tell me how you get to work. You're a doctor. And I say, after 10 minutes, I will tell you 3 felonies that you can be charged with that you will be defenseless against. So, for example, you're a doctor. Okay, I'm going to charge you with illegal administration of pain medication. I will find one client that you administered a pain drug to who says, I didn't need it. right? And I will then bring in an expert witness, a doctor, who will testify she really didn't need it. You'll be facing years in prison. You'll be facing not being able to be a doctor ever again. Or you take a plea bargain. You pay a $100,000 fine. You don't practice for a year, and then you can get back into it. Well, who wouldn't take that deal?
Yep.
You know that they got you.
It's blackmail.
And it's blackmail, and you're being framed.
Well, it's called the jury tax. And
that's right.
yeah, it's some people call it the trial tax or the jury tax. And the argument they make is, well, you see, when you plead guilty, you're accepting responsibility, which shows some remorse and some change already. Therefore, you'll get a lesser sentence for that. The reality is, the emergence of this is mostly due to the fact that the state cannot handle the amount of cases laid before it. If every person in this country who was criminally charged demanded a jury trial, the system would collapse overnight.
Well, I just want to mention, because we spoke to him on the show probably about 2 years ago, but Brandon Straka had a very similar situation. He did not go in the Capitol. He was just out on the steps. They claimed that they heard his voice in the footage that he filmed saying something that wasn't even necessarily incendiary, even in and of itself. And they were threatening him with something like 19 years in prison. And so they got him to plea down, basically.
This is what I remember about covering the Proud Boys trial, right? They were all charged with conspiracy, but also if you look back in the documents, Dominic Pizzola, who had thrown something, or there was a video of him like taking glass out of a window. He disputes if he like broke it. Yeah. He got moved onto the case way later. They moved people around based on who they could offer pleas to create this idea that there was a uniform conspiracy.
Well, that's what was so amazing about the Whitmer federal criminal trial. And I know you guys had Brandon Caserta on. And the fact that you had, and the thing with plea deals, too, is they are considered convictions by the Department of Justice. There's not a category that's like, and this is true, I just looked it up, 80% of federal criminal cases, charges are pleaded out, but they're still listed as a conviction. So what was so amazing with the Whitmer Fednapping trial is that you had 2 of the 6 federal defendants who pleaded guilty and then they became government witnesses. But then you had 4 defendants who took the risk. They went to trial in a jurisdiction, really a jury of their peers, which they had. And you had 2 men, Daniel Harris and Brandon Caserta, who were here, who were acquitted outright on every single charge. And then the other 2 men who had a hung jury. And of course, then the DOJ went back. But that's why it's so amazing. That case in and of itself is just amazing.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.